We're not as fussed about what other people are doing. And I think, if anything, I'm more concerned about what that next sort of 16-year-old kid is now currently doing or building up in their, in their parents' bedroom, just as I was several years ago.
Welcome to the Positive Disruptor series, where I'll be talking to founders and business leaders who are disrupting their sector for the better. I'm so excited today to be talking to Ben Francis, who's the founder of fitness clothing and accessory company Gymshark and an absolute pioneer in influencer marketing. It's only 8 years ago that Ben was at university delivering pizzas, and now his company has been valued at more than £1 billion. Well, welcome, Ben. I'm so delighted that you're here talking to me today. I mean, it's extraordinary to watch your journey over the past 8 years. It'd be great if you could start just telling me a little bit about how did it all begin? Yeah,
so, Gymshark was founded in 2012. And back then, all I sort of did in and around my sort of school life was I loved to go to the gym and I loved to sort of make things. And at that time, I was developing iPhone apps and websites, and they were all around fitness, because fitness has always been my sort of true passion. And one of those websites that I made was Gymshark, and Gymshark was originally built because I just wanted, again, involvement in the fitness industry however I could, and I wanted a website that would transact. So back in 2012, I was working at Pizza Hut as a delivery driver. I couldn't afford to stock up the website with stock that I'd bought. So I loaded the website up with as many products as I possibly could and drop shipped them from the Gymshark website. That went well. Took about a few months to get the first sale, but over the next sort of 6-12 months, it went well. Until I realised that I wanted to do something more around clothing. Because essentially no one was making the gym clothes that we wanted to wear. So I bought a screen printer, I bought a sewing machine, and then spent the next 2 years hand making the products that we loved so much. And it was at that point that we really started to get traction and see the business start to grow.
People don't realise, they hear the success, but don't realise the sacrifices founders make, particularly in the early days. So I can't imagine you're at university, you're delivering pizzas, and you're starting a business. I mean, how do you juggle all that? How do you keep motivated during that time?
And to be honest, even though it was incredibly hard work and it was tough, it certainly didn't feel like that at the time, because I was genuinely doing what I loved. And I would remember being sat in those lectures, just sort of being desperate and buzzing to get out so that I could go and continue working on my passion, which was Gymshark.
When I think about, we're talking about positive disruption here. When you were back at university, you're building the business, did you intentionally set out to sort of disrupt the sector? Or did you just think about there was a need that you saw that you wanted to solve for from a consumer point of view? I'd love to understand that thinking.
No, so we certainly didn't do that. And I think a lot of what happened which was great, was a combination of problem solving, and then I think it just came about by chance. But for me to sit here and say that we sort of grouped together, me and my mates, and said that we want to disrupt the industry, I just don't think that's true. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create the clothes that no one else was making, and we wanted to approach the market in the way that made sense to us. So again, we didn't jump onto TV advertising and so on. Well, one, because we couldn't afford it, but two, because we didn't watch TV, we watched YouTube. Our heroes were on YouTube. So the second I could, I was sending the product off to some of my favorite YouTubers. So we just wanted to make the clothes that would work for us. So it would be made in a slightly more fitted and tapered way. It was inspired by what some of the big lifters were doing over in California, but then mixed in with a more sort of tapered and unique European fashion.
And that probably is why it worked, because it was authentic. You understood your customer base because they were like you. And I think that sounds like why it was such a success. The question I'm dying to ask you is, what was it like, that moment where you realised Gymshark was taking off, it was a hit? What did that feel like? And I suppose, when was that moment?
So in the West Midlands, where we're from, one of the biggest events, fitness events in Europe, comes every year. So as a kid, it would be like a pilgrimage to be able to go to this event, right? And the event was called Body Power, and it's sort of in the NEC in Birmingham. And we would go, and there was this one year when Gymshark had first started and we were selling supplements. I had this sort of innate gut-wrenching feeling that we had to be there. We were the only people to bring sort of YouTubers. We had an IRL, in real life strategy, in terms of we were at the event. The product sold out, and over that weekend we turned off the website. And before the event, Gymshark was selling around £300 a day worth of product. The first half an hour, when I turned the website on after the event, we did £30,000 in revenue. Everything sold out. I was clawing at my laptop to try and turn all the products off because it was set to infinite stock because it was all made to order. Managed to turn the website off, and I will never forget being sat there in the Midlands in my mum and dad's house just thinking, I got no idea what we've done here, but wow, this is special.
Love that. And is it fair to say from the beginning, obviously you definitely thought about doing things differently, even how you talked about using influencer marketing early on, but equally actually the whole way you kind of took the product to market from the early days is different in the sense that you've always gone direct to the customer using, I suppose, digital as your vehicle to sell to customers, as opposed to a physical retail space. And I know you have had space in Covent Garden, but on the whole the business is very digitally led. Do you think that gave you a real advantage that you've had that direct line in communication with the customer from the beginning?
It's really important to have control over that journey, control over every step, fluidity between the different things, because you'll know the journey that the consumer will go on as they're researching the brand, understand that its purpose, and then purchasing and using the product. From a commercial point of view, you're interacting with dozens of different teams, and it's so difficult to get that right when you own, I guess, the entire journey. It's difficult even for Gymshark to get it right, let alone when you've got all the different third parties and retailers and so on involved. It becomes, in my opinion, almost impossible to control and get right and manage in a cohesive way that makes sense to the customer. So yeah, I think controlling the journey is important because it allows you to truly tell a story over your brand, and I think it allows you to build your brand for the long term. And then as the business started to build, we were well aware that we had sort of two distinct directions that we could take with our influencer marketing strategy. There is the one method of sponsor as many people as you possibly can and get the product out there to as many people as you can, right? And then that's great because you can reach a broad audience and you can, I guess, grow the brand quickly and get the brand in front of a lot of eyes. Now, we didn't opt to go down that route. We went down a slightly different route. As a kid, I was a season ticket holder at Aston Villa Football Club. I would go there every other weekend with my dad and my brother. I was a massive fan of that. And that actually, the football club was actually the mentality that we took towards our influencer marketing program. So rather than just sponsoring and having as many people out there as possible wearing Gymshark, we wanted to work with people that truly resonated with Gymshark's core values and aligned with our message of physical and mental self-improvement.
How hard is that to scale? Because I recognise when you start getting investment from large backers and then expectations can increase, how easy, I suppose, or how hard it is it to stay true to those values and continue to stay on that journey of doing things differently?
I think if they're properly embedded into the culture of the business and you're not disrupting just for disruption's sake, you're positively disrupting to improve things and make a positive change, then I think at that point that's how it's done right. It has to be completely and utterly embedded in every part of the company's culture, and I think that's really important because if it is like that, then if someone comes in that just doesn't want to disrupt, doesn't want to improve things and doesn't want to change, then they'll sort of stick out like a sore thumb, if that makes sense. To be honest, in terms of as we continue to expand and grow, how do we, I guess, scale up and continue to disrupt? I'm not 100% sure. We've been quite fortunate at the moment. We've got 450 staff all under one roof in our HQ in Birmingham at the moment. We've just started to open up global offices. A front-end office is now opening in Denver, Colorado at the end of this month. So I think we're going to be tested on that, and we're really going to understand just how deep within Gymshark's culture, I guess, disruption does lie.
Given we're in the middle of a pandemic, it'd be remiss of me not to touch on how COVID had impacted your business. I know we've discussed about the fact the business is built in a very digital native way, but I'd love to understand what impact COVID has had on you.
Yeah, and to be honest, COVID has changed everything in the way that the business works. Everyone's in a unique situation. It's very difficult to have a sort of one-size-fits-all to sort of solve everyone's problems, if that makes sense. So from a back-end staff point of view, it has been very tough. We're quite fortunate in the fact that we're a very digital-first business, so we're already set up on Zoom and Slack and all that sort of stuff. Everyone's got laptops, and working remotely has been okay for us. We've managed to do it, and our sort of internal sort of staff satisfaction polls and all that sort of stuff that we do have actually been really positive. And I think that's because they've seen us sort of going above and beyond to make sure that everyone's okay.
I'd love to go back a little bit and talk about, you talked about sort of behind the scenes some more in terms of actually how you are doing things differently throughout the whole business. And in terms of manufacturing, what struck me a lot is actually even how you make the fitness wear is different. You are thinking differently, and I think my understanding, you call them seamless machines. Not that I'm an expert, but I'd love to understand a little bit more about that and why that's so important to you.
Yeah, so to be honest, seamless has been around for a long time, but I think we were one of the first people in the fitness market to really utilise it in the way that it is today. And it just came from us looking for more comfortable, more efficient ways of creating a more comfortable product. And seamless is great at certain things. So, I wear it a lot. I live in it. I think it's brilliant. To the point where we invested in our own seamless machines that are housed at our headquarters. And that really helps us because it allows us to continue to develop the future of fitness wear, and we can mess around with it on a normal weekday, and we can just produce samples all day and try and continue and develop things in a unique way. Seamless is powerful because the product comes off the machine in a much more finished condition, and then it only, it's quite quick to then finish up after that. And like I said, seamless for the most part doesn't have any seams in the body, and less seams generally leads to more comfort, and it's generally better when you're doing your conditioning in the gym.
So I'm assuming it also helps, obviously, to your point, sort of allows you to be more agile and stay ahead. And I would imagine some of the more traditional established sportswear brands are starting to really stand up and look at what you're doing. How easy is it to stay ahead when there are a lot of other players that no doubt are starting to really take notice of what you're doing?
I'm not sure. I mean, to be honest, I and we at Gymshark, we're less fussed with what other people are doing. We've got our long-term vision, and we've, got our vision as to the way that the future of brands will be working in the future. And we think the future of brands will be, community-first brands that are purpose-driven and very, very agile. So we're building our business to that sort of trifecta of things. Because that's where we think the future of brands are going. We're not as fussed about what other people are doing, and I think, if anything, I'm more concerned about what that next sort of 16-year-old kid is now currently doing or building up in their, in their parents' bedroom, just as I was several years ago. So we're building the business for the long term in the way that we think makes sense and in the way that we think will resonate most effectively with the consumer.
That's definitely a common theme I hear from people that are really innovating, not focusing on others, but focusing on what you're doing and staying ahead of what's coming. That's a really interesting insight, because I think sometimes when you are in a leadership role, you can get focused on the sector and everyone around you, but staying true to what you're doing, it sounds like is absolutely critical. Now, touching on you as the founder, being an entrepreneur, which I think everyone is in love with the idea of themselves being an entrepreneur, but clearly that comes with its own challenges and so on. And I think people would be surprised to hear that you're not the CEO of Gymshark. It'd be great if you could tell me how that happened.
So going back, this is going back some years now, as Gymshark started to grow, I realised very quickly that I was very, very good at certain things, but terribly poor at other things. And ultimately, if I wanted Gymshark to become the brand that I did, and I continue to do so, sort of my dreams of the brand, I had to separate myself from the business and apply myself in the way that would most effectively grow the business and bring in people around me that were significantly more intelligent and talented than me in other areas. So I was fortunate enough to meet Steve, who's now our Chief Executive Officer, and he is so much better than me on the sort of the back end of the business, the finance, logistics and operations and so on. So what we did is Steve came in, and at the start he did 1 day a week, and then it was 2 days a week, and then before we knew it he joined full time, and we split the business into two sort of distinct areas, right? The front end of the business and the back end of the business. And that was interesting for me because I could sort of have my cake and eat it at that point. I could focus on the things that I'm really, really good at, and Steve could sort of, work on the things that I'm not very good at and manage those areas. But I could also jump in and, try and work on operations, logistics and finance in the business. And I could fail with complete and utter freedom because I know that Steve would be there as a sort of safety blanket to help fix things, if that makes sense. So I had this incredible opportunity to do what I'm really good at, focus on my passions and my loves and help grow the business in that respect, whilst also having some of the other areas of the business managed really, really well, but also I could, have a go at them and fail essentially. And that was really, really important to me. And I must admit, it was pretty heartbreaking to have to make that decision. And as Steve came in and managed the business significantly better than what I could, it was a little bit heartbreaking because it was the business is my baby. I've sort of started the thing, but over the long term, it's so much more fulfilling for me to be able to learn, develop at the things I'm not very good at, and watch the business continue to prosper and have the incredible culture that it has today, which, to be honest, is down to Steve.
But I would argue that's great leadership, being self-aware and knowing where you need to bring other people in. So I would take that as a real example of leadership. Even though you touch on having your cake and eat it, no doubt there is still a lot of pressure on you as the founder, the owner of the company. How do you deal with the pressure and, I suppose the mental side that must be tough at times?
Yeah, well, so to be honest, I feel like I've got an amazing responsibility, and I think responsibility gives meaning. And I also think that I have the best job in the world, right? Like outside of COVID, I get to travel the world, I get to meet so many amazing people. I get to work in the company I founded, and I get to develop great product and create a great brand that genuinely changes people's lives, which I think is such an amazing thing, and it gives me so much fulfillment and so much meaning in my life and as to what I do. Sometimes the pressures are tough, but again, I just sort of try to rise to the occasion and develop myself as best as I can so that I'm best equipped to, solve the problems and challenges ahead. But ultimately, I feel like I got the best job in the world, so every day is exciting for me.
And when you are clearly doing things differently in a sector, sometimes there's not obvious people you can turn to because people haven't done what you're doing. They've never done it before. So who did you, particularly in the early days, maybe turn to for advice? And more recently, who do you go to just to get that sort of, I suppose, just reassurance or if you need that second opinion?
To be honest, I'm not sure. So back in the day, it was Paul and Steve. Paul and Steve both came on at the same time, Paul as chairman and Steve as chief exec. I've started to read a lot, which makes a big difference, to be honest. I read a book actually about Abraham Lincoln, and it talked about him surrounding himself with people that disagreed with him, people that thought in different ways and were, completely different to him. And I've tried to apply that to my life as well, and it's made a big, big difference. I'll often bounce problems off, people across the business, whether you've been there for a week or 5 years, and sort of chat to those guys. I'll speak to people externally as well and just sort of ask questions. And to be honest, I just love meeting new people and learning and asking questions of those people, because for the most part, people have, solved the problems that I'm trying to solve now in a slightly different way and maybe in a slightly different industry. And I think context is important as well. So, for example, when we have a new creative join the business, creativity is this interesting thing that you're trying to sort of recreate. And I always say that the cheat sheet to creativity is just to apply to what you're doing, what people have done in another industry or area of some sort. And generally, I can sort of try and apply problems that have been solved in other industries, going back to what I talked about, the jewelry quarter back in the day, being the sort of initial old school influencer marketing, just apply that solution into the new industry that we're a part of today. And I think that's been really powerful for me as well.
It's interesting, when I speak to founders, you all have something that's very, very clear. You all are very curious. You're always all learning. And it sounds like just the example you just gave is a prime example. What are the other values do you think you have to be a successful founder?
So I think you have to have a clear vision. I think ultimately I would probably summarize it into one word, and I would say I think you have to be really courageous as well. I think that's really important because, again, going back to the thing I mentioned earlier, Gymshark could have grown significantly more quickly, but it would have been grown in the wrong way. We would have been taking shortcuts, and I think it's important to not take those shortcuts. You have to be courageous, you have to stick to your long-term vision. And I genuinely think, particularly in today, you have to be culture first. I think you have to really think about people, because no individual will achieve anything alone. You have to build a great team around you, you have to be open-minded, and you have to build a team that's going to hold you accountable. I think that's really important.
Just listening to you today, just makes me really reflect, and you start to realize the importance of having values, having a value-driven company. And I think particularly more today than in any other time. And the fact you talk about customers being part of the community, I think we're going to hear more and more companies try and follow suit. But it's no surprise that you've been an absolute pioneer, not just in influencing marketing, but in everything that you're clearly doing. And I just hope there are more leaders and founders like you, because I think we want to see more companies be as successful as Gymshark, that stay true to their values and truly set out to add value and give back. So a huge thank you from me for being part of our Positive Disruptor series.